associate professor in Jindal Law School, JGU, and he's also an associate research fellow at Environmental Law Center, Faculty of Law, University of Cologne in Germany, and also in the same university, he is associate member at the Global South Studies Center. Dr. Agalibi is an extensive he has an extensive experience in teaching and research in African studies, in sustainable development, environment, and human rights. So now I think you can understand why we are honored and we are appreciating that he has accepted my invitation today to join us for this very special session on Africa. So Dr. Agalibi will share with us today his insights on challenges that are facing Africa and his perspective for a better future to Africa and Africans in general. So I will not speak too much, and I will I leave the floor to Dr. Dennis to start his presentation. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Professor Adams, and thank you very much, my audience. I'm sorry for coming late, and I feel honored having this time with you. I think maybe like an hour or thereabouts. This is a very interesting topic that we're going to talk about within the short time that we have. Africa is like the heart of the global South. And I don't know what you know about Africa. As much as I can share with you, I will say that Africa shares a unique trait, a unique characteristics. But we are having a challenge. I call it a challenge because in that challenge, we have other challenges that kind of form a subset. And if we can deal with that major challenge, every other challenges that form a subset under that will easily be solved. And what's that challenge? The challenge of leadership. That is affecting the development of Africa. So I decide that I'm going to use a kind of cascading form of explaining my points, bringing it down, leadership, development, and then come down to the crisis of conflict and issues of dictatorship. So look at the form this way: leadership, development, and then you have a kind of two arms. Dictatorship on the left and insecurity, conflicts on the right. So let's go and let's look at what do we know about Africa. What do we know about Africa? Africa is a rich continent with about, as of now, I think it's valued at about 3.14 GDP, or is GDP. It has very rich environments, rivers, oceans, plain coasts, fresh water, human resources. We have natural resources, minerals in diverse forms. Africa is a very rich continent. However, it's, of course, when people refer to Africa as a kind of a thesis of paradox, they are right. Because when you expect a continent that used to be the place where the West come to get what they should survive on, and now with all that it has, is looking out for who to give them what to feed on. It's a paradox, that is difficult to explain. And if you look at the end of my list, I said that it has an unenviable record of highest number of dictators occupying powers in their countries. I don't know which any other continent, whether in Asia, whether in the Americas, even in the Americas where you have Cuba, you have, that dictatorial countries there, you don't have as much dictators like you have in Africa. It's like people get into power and it's difficult for them to imagine life outside power, and they do all that it takes to hold on to it, because they never pictured themselves being in that position and how is it going to look like. Like, you find very few African leaders that go into leadership prepared for it. You find most time accidental leaders. And when you have accidental leaders that peradventure somebody was misbehaving and some group of people come to meet you and say, look, you can upstage this person and kick this person out and you can do better. You were not prepared for it. We have those that were prepared for it, but were not adequately prepared for it. And those form a very few set of persons. Those that were prepared for it in the wrong way by virtue of being mentored by the wrong leaders. For example, where you find a dictator that has a son and the son has already trained, the father will train him into being this kind of a leader that won't accept a no. So we have examples of, for example, Togo, Eyadema died, he gave power to his son. We have Chad Republic, Debbie died, he gave power to, and the son took over. Now, it's funny if you say that, okay, if the man died, did he handed over power before he died? He did not. But the son has been trained to understand that, look, the survival of the fittest is that if anyone tries to stand on your way to get into my seat after I die, then the person should join me in the grave. As simple as that. No alternative to that. And that trend continues and is still continuing. So what are the challenges that are facing Africa? If we now break it down from the point of other issues, leadership and everything, you find defective leadership as the first. And then you find ineffective educational systems. You find uneven developmental patterns. You find exploitative economic decisions. You find degrading environmental practices. And then you find lack of enabling environment for science and technology advancement. Now, all these form into a box of what is holding down the development of Africa. But it is deliberate that we make defective leadership to be the number one on the list. Because once we can solve that, we'll be able to make progress. We'll be able to leap beyond the walls that are standing on the way of our development now. Education issues will be taken care of. Environmental issues will be taken, every other issue will be taken care of once we're able to deal with leadership. Now, for the sake of you understanding how leadership strives in Africa, we have, unlike what we find in the West now and in most Asian countries, Africa traditionally, historically has three sets of or three characteristics of leadership. There were times when these three exist at the same time. However, due to civilization, the two have been relegated to leave one to be the dominant kind of leadership we have. So we used to have the traditional, the religious, and the political kind of leadership. And these three used to exist. Presently now, the political style of leadership is the dominant one. Religious, traditional, those ones, they are just there ceremoniously. Even when you look at countries up north, like Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, where the ulamas, the imams, the sheikhs, they are influential. To a large extent, their leadership stops at being influential. And the influence that they wield is actually dependent on what the politicians allow them. And I mean, I'm just trying to make a comparative analysis. If you try to compare that with the kind of influence that the Ayatollah in Iran has as a religious leader, it's the opposite. He decides the kind of power that the politicians wield. But in Africa, once a politician feels that a traditional ruler or a traditional leader or a religious leader is becoming too influential for his comfort, for his political comfort, it cuts him to size. So based on that, we don't have any other choice. If not, the religious leaders, the traditional leaders should naturally have been the conscience of leadership in Africa. The conscience in the sense that because they can relate with the people better and the people can relate with them better, the politicians should naturally have respected them more because they know that if they talk to the people will just turn to their direction. We've seen, for example, in the case of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak was very wary of the influence of the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood. And he knows that until I deal with their influence, I'm not going to have, and indeed, he never had peace of mind while in power until he was booted out. So it's just typical of what we have in Africa. So that trend, of course, that trait of insecurity in office makes most of African leaders to feel we have to be the kind of sit-tight leaders that will guarantee, first, our influence, guarantee the progenitation of our ideology, political ideology, and also ensure that those close to us that made it possible for us to be there, they are also protected. Interestingly, there are dictators in Africa that when you look at their performance on the side of development, you feel, okay, this person is performing well, the people deserve him, he should stay. But then you look at how are they getting themselves put on that seat? Is it through a democratic process? That's what you should examine. Now, as long as they remain there, how is that affecting the overall security of the country and this sub-region and the region as a whole? If I want to prepare a comprehensive list of dictators in Africa, it's going to take our time. So what I did, I selected some. And then I'm going to talk about those that are still in power, make reference to them. So I will talk more from my heart than from what I have here. And then make reference to those that are no more in power, some of them, a few of them late already. But what they did, their style of leadership, the consequence of their style of leadership, the African continent is still suffering from their style of leadership till now, because they ensure that they put into the ground a seed that will grow so strong to the extent that it's difficult for even the international community to uproot what they've planted. So there's talk of Kagame. Well, Kagame has been in power since 2000. Naturally, it should be seen as a war hero. It should be seen as a hero, someone that's contributed to the restoration of peace in Rwanda. His role was a hero-like role. In fact, if he is decided to be worshipped like Mandela, he deserves it. But yeah, he got into power, stayed, first not democratically, of course, and then he helped nurture Rwanda to become a democratic country, stood for election, became president, served for 2 terms democratically, of course, became popular. And that's always, I mean, that's been the trend with leaders like Kagame. They always start well. Became popular. Actually, Kagame is performing. He performed well, and he's still performing well. When you look at the indices, developmental indices, when you look at policies, he's performing well. Several Africans envy him, envy Rwandans. I feel like, okay, we wish Kagame can even become our own president. But then look at the pathway. After serving the second term, he instigated the referendum that led to amend the constitution for him to run for a third term. That is always the trait. That's always the character. And he won that referendum, was approved by 98% record. And he's in power now. He's very strong. He's doing fine. What we don't know is in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years, what will be the fate of Rwanda? Will Rwanda be the same Rwanda that it is now is going to turn to be like Zimbabwe? Because I didn't mention Mugabe here for a reason why. Mugabe's leadership did not, as bad as Mugabe's leadership turned out to be towards the last 10 years of him being in office, his regime did not contribute to conflict in Africa in any way. His people suffered, yes, but his regime did not contribute to any form of instability in the sub-region where he belongs, unlike Rwanda, unlike Mugabe and Kagame. And I'm going to explain that later. So we don't know. They always start well. Mugabe was a hero. You know, he fought for independence of Zimbabwe, and he actually started well. Ended in a very terrible way. But coming down to Museveni, Museveni has been in power since 1986. He started well also, right? You remember? He removed the vampire called Idi Amin, and we celebrated him. We adored him. But he's there, he doesn't want to leave. Paul Biya has been there. Paul Biya he doesn't even appear publicly again now because he's too sick to appear publicly. He has been there since 1982. President Obiang Mbasogo of Equatorial Guinea, he has been there since 1979. He's still there till now. His family virtually owns the country and the minerals there. He decides who gets what. The late Idris Deby was in power from 1990 to 2021. His son, Mahamat Deby, was the defense minister when he died. It's difficult for anybody to just stand against. I mean, you can relate to the president of Egypt was also a defense minister, and they are very powerful, especially when the defense minister is from the armed forces. You know, a uniformed man made a cabinet member a defense minister is difficult to stand on this way. That's, you know, that's once you see that, just know that is the de facto president even, you know. So the son stepped in, young man, but feared. It looked cool, but feared. And then Mama Gaddafi was like the Lord. He wanted even United States of Africa. He pushed, campaigned, and ensured we had the transformation of Organization of African Unity to African Union. Ultimately, he was expecting that we're going to have United States of Africa. We're going to have one single country, Africa, as a country. And if Muammar Gaddafi had remained alive, because he hardly pursued anything, good or bad, and not succeed, he may as well. If he had to use all resources of Libya to make sure he achieved that, he would have done that. And then we had the ex-president Blair Compaoré of Burkina Faso. He assassinated his good friend Thomas Sankara, a Marxist, a popular Marxist, to become the president, and he was there for 27 years until he was ousted in 2014. Now, Sudan is in the news, as in the news for a wrong reason. Sudan was I mean, we're happy 2019 when the people exercise their power, albeit in a violent way, to house a leader that was untouchable, that was so feared. And they successfully did that. But today, they are back again on the streets. This time around, they don't have a common enemy again. They are like, these are the same persons that they entrusted with the drive for revolution as the enemies. And what's the root of that? Dictatorship. So among all these leaders that I've mentioned, let me point out those that their regime, their dictatorial regime, has fueled conflict in Africa. Paul Kagame. You will expect him to be a man of peace, but when we move on, you discover that I start analyzing one of them one by one, starting with him, with the conflict in Democratic Republic of Congo. The Democratic Republic of Congo, experts see that country as the wealthiest country. And until you go into geographical and geophysical, especially geophysical analysis of the richness of the Democratic Republic of Congo, you won't understand why. It has everything. It has gold. There are some places in the DRC, especially in the North Kivu area, where you don't need to dig too deep for you to find minerals, diamond, gold. But those places are dead zone. All kind of armed groups are operating there. And the United Nations, experts from United Nations, security agencies, private security agencies, the security agencies of the DRC, they have strong evidence to show that Kagame is using, is still using the resources of Rwanda to sponsor armed groups, especially the M23, operating in the territory of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Rwanda is a landlocked country. Rwanda is not really a resource-rich country. But you have the Hutus or thereabouts that occupy the rich part of Democratic Republic of Congo, and they form a minority in DRC. Kagame is using the pretext of, I am protecting my tribes, men and women that have been marginalized in DRC. The same narrative that somebody in the East is using to attack another Eastern European country. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. If you don't know, what's his name? Putin. One of the main argument for invading Ukraine is to protect the interests of the native Russians that are minorities in Ukraine. That's the main argument that he put forward as why is it. And the same thing, whenever the National Army of Rwanda make incursion to DRC, Kagame will say that, well, we are fighting the rebels there that are killing our native people that are there. But actually, it's not the truth. He is using his army to support the M23 so that they carry out their operations of exploiting minerals without being disturbed. They sell the minerals to Rwanda through the black market, through the back door. Of course, they make the money without being traced, and they supply munitions. That has caused tension and violence in the eastern part of the DRC. It has caused thousands of people to die. In fact, DRC hosts the largest contingent of UN peacekeepers in the world. That was the time the UN Security Council decided to cut it down to stop the but they discovered that doing that will mean that a lot of peacekeepers have also died in that country trying to keep the peace. several rebels were arrested. There was a time that the former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, intervened, and the leader of the M23 was arrested. Then he was prosecuted, but they couldn't convict him, and so he was released. So that's Kagame. The next person is somebody that is very familiar to us because his country is in the news for a different reason. That is, the Parliament of Uganda just approved the death penalty for homosexuality. And while he's oppressing his people, he wants to remain in power forever for as long as he lives. He has changed the constitution 3 times to remain in power. He has been accused of supporting armed rebels, the ADF, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, also for the same reason. The minerals, exploiting the minerals. And the exploitation of these minerals, they are not for the sake of the national treasury of Uganda. They're for the sake of his own private treasury. And the ADF keep killing innocent persons in North Kivu area. Sometimes the ADF and the M23 will clash. Sometimes when the DRC National Army comes so strong on them, they form alliance to fight the DRC National Army together. And then after fighting off the DRC National Army, they fuse themselves to try to gain territory, just like what the drug lords in Mexico and other countries do. So he has been accused directly of intervening, making incursions into the territory of the DRC, all also under the pretext of, oh, the ADFs, they are disturbing Ugandans, and so I used to go there to attack them. So far, there is no succession plan. There was a time that a popular musician tried to stand. It actually stood in the election against him, and he was brutalized. He was arrested. He was dealt in a very, very terrible way, tortured, prosecuted, and he had to be flown out of the country to United States of America to be cared for. He returned back to the country. But for the past 2 years now, we don't hear of that young man any longer. He has been silenced. Then Gaddafi. Now, I've mentioned 2 leaders that are alive and still in office. Now, I want to mention, I'm now mentioning someone that is not alive, but his works as he's speaking. You know, what he has done is he's speaking from the grave. So Gaddafi, being a very strong and influential leader while he was alive, he ensured that the system of governance in Libya was too powerful, not just for his country, also for his Arab neighbors. The only country that could stand up to him was Egypt. And of course, that was because, and with all due respect to my colleague, I may be wrong. That was because at the time Hosni Mubarak was in power, Hosni Mubarak was sitting in between the West and others. When I mean others now, the West needs Egypt to be calm for Israel to be calm. And also the West needed Egypt to be in order for the Middle East to be in order. And so for that reason, they need to empower Egypt. They need to ensure that they look away from whatever Hosni Mubarak is doing, even if there are evidence to show that Hosni Mubarak was way more dictatorial and way more intolerant. than Gaddafi. I mean, Gaddafi, you see, go to countries, give them money, do things. He was still this diplomatic person. Hosni Mubarak at the time was one of the most protected presidents in the world because he cannot afford to allow a slip in his security because of the Muslim Brotherhood. At that time, we're not hearing much of Al Qaeda. We're not hearing, the Muslim Brotherhood were a very strong cell, and the West were very, very of them. So the only president that could stand up to Gaddafi was Hosni Mubarak. Now, Gaddafi used that his influence to ensure that he also controlled the movement of arms. He also controlled the frequency of armed conflicts in Africa. When he feels that conflicts are rising, he knows how to cut off supply of ammunition, which is the lifeline of any conflict. And when he feels that that conflict is going down, he needs it to hot up so that there will be less concentration on issues in Libya and on that country, simply opens the way for the ammunition to move. So he kept doing that. And for that, his colleagues actually feared him because he was also having the money to influence political change in any country. Now, what happened when he was there, we had relative peace because of that control mechanism that he had. We had peace in Chad Republic. We had Al Qaeda was nowhere around the sub-Saharan part of Africa. We were just hearing about Al Qaeda in Pakistan, their work with Taliban. Even Al Qaeda in the African Maghreb or thereabouts were nowhere around us. Of course, when Al Qaeda fell in Afghanistan, we had the Al Qaeda in the sub-Saharan Maghreb coming down to Burkina Faso, and that time they tried to make Togo to be a kind of hub itself for them, and they attacked Timbuktu and all that. All that time it happened, but the international community came, France came, and they were able to subdue them. Gaddafi was still alive. When Gaddafi fell, every other thing went into disarray. Why? Gaddafi wasn't having a structure. He wasn't having, in fact, at the time he fell, nobody was ready, even among his allies, to stand in his shoes, because the West orchestrated it. His people were happy to have him down and put under the ground. But the consequence of that is that we've had serious conflicts in Mali, in Niger, Chad, and Mauritania. Just 4 days ago, over 160 people were massacred in Burkina Faso, northern Burkina Faso. The governments, and you see, this killing goes on and on. The security situation in Nigeria worsened. In fact, before 2011, we're not having issues with Boko Haram. Where will they get the ammunition from? Because for you to get ammunition to Nigeria, you have to pass through other countries. You have to pass through frontiers. But once Libya fell, of course, Libya being the Sahara Desert being the migrant route, all this while became the route for terrorists to freely move. Migrants don't even take the Sahara, the desert again, because they know they're not going to survive it. The terrorists have taken over the route. So the death of Gaddafi simply opened up that route. It opened up the illicit trade in ammunitions. So Boko Haram keep getting constant supply of what they need to carry out their terrorist acts. ISIS also was dislodged, and they were able to find a nest, a safe nest in West Africa. Then the Al Qaeda in Maghreb were able to also establish themselves in Mali. And because the leaders, the dictators that were in these countries before, they were not actually having the will to stand against external forces. They were oppressing their people, right? Their people were not having the power to stand up against them. But they were not having what it takes to stand up against external aggression, especially when terrorists are employing unconventional way of attacking the country. What I mean by that is kind of sporadic attack. They come, they attack, kill 50 people, they withdraw. They come again, take over a town, and then stay for some time, and they withdraw. It wasn't a consistent form of attack. So, and that kind of unconventional way of attacking the territories is not what the National Army of Mali, of Chad were prepared for. Africa, if you talk of Somalia, they've been Somalia, Eritrea, they have a history of war, their armed forces, they've gotten used to preparing for war. Egypt, they're always at alert because of the history of war and everything. But in West Africa, we don't have that history of war. So our armed forces, all they do is they stay in the barracks, they eat, receive salary, go on duties, roadblocks, and come back home. They were not ready for war. So when terrorists come attacking, they were not ready for what they got. So the fall of Gaddafi contributed to the spread of instability in the West African and North African region, in the Middle East, and in fact, almost beyond what we find in Africa. But basically, the fall of Gaddafi has affected the instability of Africa. Making reference to these leaders, you may be asking, so how does that translate to the underdevelopment of Africa? When you look at what is happening in Sudan now, if that is, okay, yeah, I still have one more left. When you look at what is happening in Sudan now, al-Bashir also just like Hosni Mubarak. And you see, the interesting thing is, which is unfortunate, every dictator that you find in Africa at one time or another had the backing of the West. Every of them. They at one time had the backing of the West, whether at the point of inception or at the point of consolidation of power. They had the backing of the West. And then you ask yourself, what's the interest of the West? The West will always say that we are supporting a strong man because you need a strong man to hold a strong country together. That's always the excuse, that if you don't have a strong man in power, the country will falter, the country will fall apart. But why don't you allow Africans to decide who a strong man is for them? Because at the end of the day, I teach international human rights law, and when we talk about the relativism and the universality of human rights, it looks like, okay, we are finding ourselves in a kind of imbalance in postulation what is right and what is wrong. Postulate what is right and what is wrong, rather. So if these dictators are abusing human rights and you can't question them because they are your potted plants that you just water at your own will and you don't have problem with that as long as you do your own wish, then what is it about human rights that you're preaching? So it's a contrast that even we Africans can't explain. So it's until we remain at the mercy of the dictators until they go against the wish of the West. So Omar Bashir was there. He came into power with support of the West. And he forged alliance with the West. It was strong until he got to the point where he became uncontrollable for them. Now he's out of power, but the people that Omar Bashir was using to oppress his people, the RSF, he was using the RSF to counter the influence of the Sudanese army when he was in power. He intentionally ensured that there is that split, there is no concentration in one apparatus, so that he can checkmate the influence of the generals. The same RSF collaborated with the army to put him out of power. And now the two sides, they are now fighting for the booty. The bottom line is this: every dictator that we have in Africa and that we have had in Africa, they always lay that foundation. They always sow that seed for conflict. They always sow that seed for insecurity, because it always gets to a tipping point when either the people revolt, like we had with the Arab Spring in Tunisia under the former president, or some persons within their cycle feel, hey, you've eaten enough of the treasure, it's my turn. Dictatorship becomes something that is enviable by some persons that wants to also be there. At the same time, for the people that are oppressed, they want to stand up to it to see how they can conquer it when they have the wherewithal. And no matter what, whether you want to, as long as you want to upstage a leader, not through the ballot box, it must lead to insecurity. Forget about, oh, we're happy for now that the strong man is down. Show me any country. Tunisia till now has still not recovered. In fact, it has still not gone back to pre-Arab Spring level, economic-wise, peacetime-wise. They're still fighting. They're still having issues. So there is no way we can say that, yes, the people have prevailed. Egypt has still not recovered. Well, Egypt is making the progress, but it's still facing the test of democracy. There are still press persons that are still in jail. Since when this smiling-looking leader, I used to like his smile. Your president smiles. He smiles in a way that you think he's this kind of calm person. Yes, but since when he came into power, I think the state of emergency is still on. They still have the presidential and executive powers to arrest without prosecution and put in jail for some time. So, and indeed, we have peace, we have calmness in these countries. Somehow in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Zimbabwe, in these countries where we have these dictators, but they call it the silence of the grave. It's not really what we can call a genuine kind of calmness. It's just awaiting a boomerang, and we don't know when that boomerang will be. So Sudan now has gone back and is retrogressing because of and we don't know when it's going to end. Now let's talk about a dictator that we should watch out for. Kais Saied. He's an intellectual. He's my senior colleague, right? He's a professor of law. But he's a tough man. He was elected into power. He speaks very well. I like to hear him speak. But then he woke up one morning and said, hey, these politicians are too corrupt. So he suspended the parliament. He sacked the prime minister, so much to sack the prime minister, suspend the parliament, dissolve the parliament without issuing a decree for a new election. He said the election is going to come when he wishes, when he feels that the country is ready. And then he also dissolved the Supreme Judicial Council and sacked every one of the members. So it's like he's the numero uno of the country. He's the executive, he's the legislature, he's the judiciary. And he's an elected president. He's not even thinking of when his tenure will end, what will happen, election or whatever. No. Now he's going after Africans. He said, the Africans, so he don't see Tunisia as part of, as he don't see them as Africans. So those coming from Nigeria, from Ghana, they are the Africans. So he said the Africans are the one, they are flooding the country, they are messing up the country, they should leave. Instigating violence against sub-Saharan Africans. So he's a dictator that we should watch. I think he's over 90 years old, or over about 8-something years. A very old man, but he's a dictator that we should watch. We don't know how long he's going to hold on. No military background, nothing, but it's very, very strong. I hope he learns from the former immediate past president of Egypt. Yes, I mean, when he came also, we had high hopes and he actually started reforms and everything. But he forgot that he had no military background. And no matter how strong you seem to be as a civilian president, you have the military guys in Africa just behind you, watching you, you know. So he's a dictator that we should watch, and we don't know how long he's going to hold on to what he's doing. So what I've been able to do is break down, try to connect the dictatorial tendencies in our African leaders with insecurity in Africa. And then also link that, create a nexus with underdevelopment in Africa. They always say that the worst democracy is far better than the best dictatorship. Because the essence of choice in any form of governance is the lifeline of the people. The people wake up to the fact that when at least there is 4 years ahead of us, so we are going to decide. But under dictatorship is hopelessness. You don't know when it's going to end. Can you just imagine? Well, I know the climate these days is not predictable, but still, can you imagine that in this climate that we have in India now, we don't even know when this heat is going to go down to, to 20 degrees again, and we just like, it's going to be a state of hopelessness. But we know, no matter how climate change turns out to be, we know that it gets to a particular point, it will change, you know? But when you're under a dictator, you don't know when, you don't know how. It's a state of hopelessness. So what do we need? We need a systemic study or examination of the failures of our past leaders and our current leaders, and perhaps understudy the effect of colonialism on the process of breeding the kind of leaders that have upstaged democracy in Africa. That is going to help us in the sense that if you look at the issue of colonialism in Africa, the colonial masters, they were not concerned as to how the people respond to them per se. They were concerned as to who are those people among them, among we Africans, that the people respect and the people will respond to. And once they empower those people financially and economically, they get the number of slaves they want, they get the lands they want, they're at peace. They don't have any issues. It is a kind of carryover or kind of extension of that culture that we are having now with the dictators being there and the West saying, okay, we know where to point our nose to, and we know when to look away. If Kagame if he's calm and is doing what is right for us, we don't have a problem with him. Have you watched the movie Hotel Rwanda? Have you heard of the movie Hotel Rwanda? Hotel Rwanda. Okay. The hero that was able to save a lot of lives during the war kept them in his hotel. He was kidnapped from South Africa, bundled to Rwanda, made to stand trial, albeit in an undemocratic way, and sentenced to imprisonment. It took the intervention of America to negotiate with Rwanda, with Kagame, that, okay, release him to forever leave Rwanda and let him relocate to the United States. He won't come back again, but just release him. And of course, he's their boy. He said yes. If indeed the man was guilty of the crime you alleged and prosecuted him for, why should you listen to anybody? So that is the same trait that, the West, I see the West, or we have observed the West taking on now. Let's keep these strong men there, as long as they do have it. So we also have to have a rethink on the model of representative governance. I always believe that democracy is not a one-way definition. Yes, it's a government for the people, by the people, and thereabout. But the style itself should not be necessarily Western-styled democracy. So far, we don't have what we call autochthonous kind of democracy. That is a homegrown style of democracy. No. Is it democracy that we received from our Western friends? India has a style of governance before the colonial masters came. If you look at your history, what issues were you having with governance before they came? Were you having a king? Were you having a powerful religious leader that was holding the entire, and imagine how big India was. India was all about Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, the great India. So how were you people existing then? How many anthropologists have done research into that to compare with what we have now, the kind of democracy we have now? So Africa needs to have a rethink. We should not box ourselves into the corner of it has to be a Western-styled democracy. That should be a Westminster. I mean, India is practicing a Westminster-styled parliamentary system of government. If it's working for you, good. But if it's not working, why don't you sit down to review? The same thing with Africa. Nigeria is practicing the presidential system of government, the American style. We have 2 legislative houses because US Congress has 2 legislative houses. Why? And we have a president that is so powerful. Everything is in his hands. In fact, the president of Nigeria has immunity, the president of the United States doesn't have immunity. So we seem to just feel like, let's just copy what they are doing. Why don't we sit down to think of how can we do our own better? Look, no matter what one talk about the Cubans, they seem to well, of course, dictatorial, also one-party system, but they designed what is working for them. The Chinese designed what is working for them. No matter how much you want to condemn them, you ask the Chinese, is the system working for you? Are you happy with your leaders? Do you want a multi-party system? Or you're okay with this? Let them decide. We should not assess what is working for us based on the assessments of the West. We should think of what system can offer us. Also, we should formulate an indigenous model of democratic system in our countries. Finally, we should structure accountability. We should structure accountability for all levels of leadership. Accountability at the national, at the regional, and at the local level. We should structure accountability into all levels so that Once we structure accountability into all levels of leadership, it will be difficult for us to breed dictators. As it is now, we are breeding dictators, even from the family unit. You know, we are breeding dictators. Fathers just want to be the all in all. You go to this school. I am an African father. In fact, you're in America now. If you misbehave, I'm sending you back to Africa. Now you put you in the school that I want. You're breeding dictators. We should start entrenching accountability from the smallest unit of governance to the highest unit. Thank you very much. I hope I have been able to do a little bit of justice to this topic, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dennis. It was really insightful presentation and talk, and also you have explained also to my students today new dimension in our course about political leadership and the inconsistency in political leadership in Africa. So we can now, do you prefer you take all questions?
Yes, I can take all questions. I don't know. So yeah.
One question, the question, and then you have an answer, or
yeah. Anyone, I can take one by one. Yeah, that'd be good. We are not much, so I can take one.
countries are really facing a real problem in regards of leadership and political and economic governance.
Yeah.
So now I think my point of view is that I think this we need an external assistance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how from in your views or in your thoughts, what do you think? How can an international community support the efforts in Africa to attain economic sustainable development, but not only economic sustainable. Now the talk is about political, complete political and political governance.
Okay.
So we need to have a reform in political governance. So how international community can support, or international organization and civil societies
can support African countries? Thank you very much. Indeed, the international community, we can't separate them completely from our affairs. We need them. They are developed, they are advanced, they have more experience in governance, but we should start first by having a say in the process of their involvement. The trade, what we've seen, the trade has been that they give to us with the right hand and they try to take from with their left hand. So let's empower ourselves. Let's just have something that they need from us and get ourselves to a point where we can actually decide some aspect of our destiny. And then they will respect us even when they are assisting us. Presently now, they have no regard for us in assisting us. So they hold us to ransom, and it's difficult for us to renegotiate from the point of weakness. We need them first, and most importantly, we need them to build strong institutions in Africa. The West concentrates on people, on persons of interest, and they are not interested in building institutions. Unfortunately, their reason is because once you build a strong institution, you will build enlightened persons, you will build independent persons, persons that will be able to decide and structure their own future for themselves. We've had such persons in Africa. We had Thomas Sankara. We had this guy from the former prime Mulumba, right? You know Mulumba, Congo, was assassinated. You know, was assassinated. We have people, you know, that have stood for Africa, that are revolutionary, that try to really build Africa. What we observe is that somehow the West infiltrated the ranks and used Africans within Africa to cut them down. Why? Because they know that these people, they wanted to build a strong institution. We had a revolutionary leader in the name of General Murtala Muhammad then. He was a leader for a short time, and then he was assassinated. At the time he was assassinated, the ex-leader that was in the United Kingdom schooling that time, General Gowon, was accused as being the one that instigated the assassination of Murtala in Nigeria. And in fact, the intelligence in Nigeria was able to gather the communication between Gowon and the British government. So we have enough evidence to show that the international, so when you say the international community, we have to be specific that the international community, not as a national entity serving as international community. Because if the DFID comes now and says, I want to do this, is the international community. Actually, it doesn't represent the international community in reality sense. It's representing the national interest of the United Kingdom. So the international community should indeed be international community, not a national community coming to Nigeria, coming to Uganda to say, you have to amend your law. If not, we're not going to give you a piece of cake. You get what I'm saying? If you're going to put a pressure in Africa on anything, it should come from United Nations. It should come from an organization that has the moral stand, the international legal stand to speak. But once a national entity is constituting himself as an international entity, the fact that you're out of Africa doesn't make you, you understand what I'm saying? That's the problem. There's a lot the international community can do. Let me say that the first thing they should do, let's have Africa on the Security Council. So let's have a say. Once Africa is on the Security Council, we have a teeth. Once we have that, so you can imagine we have a veto power. It means that for just that seat alone, for you to do this, you have to come to meet us and negotiate a vote. Just that one vote can spoil everything for America, can spoil everything. Look at, just imagine a Security Council without Russia. Oh my God. Imagine a Security Council without China. We would have been in a serious problem. So I think we need their help, but first, let them give us the teeth. And then every other thing we follow.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I have a question regarding institutions such as the African Union.
Yes.
So what do you think is the role of African Union when it comes to promoting democracy? So of course the African Union in its charter mentions that the union shall strive to promote democratic principles in the continent. Do you think it has done a good job so far in promoting democracy, or do you think there's scope for it to improve?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. And I will try to make sure that keep everything short within the next 5 minutes so that it can be true, because I have a class by 10 minutes past 2. Okay, so within the little that the African Union can do, they are doing their best. Let me give you an example. When in Gabon, when the immediate past president did not, he clearly lost the election, but he didn't want to hand over power. The African Union stood up to him. They went to mediate with him. They talked to him. They pampered him. They gave him options. You can stay in your state, give you a place to stay, no problem. You're peaceful, won't persecute you. He said, no, yes, no, yes, no. Until he got to a point. President Muhammadu Buhari called other leaders and said, look, we pampered this guy enough. Now we are giving him ultimatum. If he doesn't leave office by so time, the African Union will constitute a force and invade the country and get him out by force. And at that stage, he started negotiating a peaceful exit out. That night, he left before the deadline. That is unprecedented. African Union has never taken such a step. ECOMOG, under ECOWAS, the ECOMOG is the military force of ECOWAS. They've done that in some, they've not done that per se, but at least they've intervened military-wise by keeping peace, but not that direct. African Union have sanctioned Mali, they've sanctioned Burkina Faso, the sanction is still there, and the sanction is biting out on them. I mean, these are countries that are landlocked. If you're under sanctions and you can't receive the kind of, you can't export your crops, you can't export your natural resources and all that, you can't raise the revenue, you'll be affected. And you can't buy arms legally, you have to buy from black markets. These countries are depending on Russia to survive now because they're not getting what they need to get. So African Union is doing all that it takes, and they are standing up to what they should do, you know, yeah. So far. They can do more, but they are trying so far, yeah. Any other question? Okay, I think, okay, let me hear you then maybe both of you, okay. Okay, please let me hear my friend also, so I just take the two together. No, just let me just hear you so that I just, yeah.
Right, so this idea of democracy being the best thing,
yeah,
is still very problematic because a lot of people view democracy as a Western construct.
Yes.
So there's this idea in economics that countries can only practice democracy effectively if they are of a particular standard, particular economic level.
Yeah.
Because when people are very poor, when people are uneducated, they don't make informed decisions.
Yeah.
So there's this idea that a benevolent dictator is a good thing at the start, and then later they can transit into a more democratic system. I'm just trying to get your own thoughts on your view. There have been examples like Singapore, they had the Ban who was there for 31 years, and he was very autocratic. Imprisoned many people, he did many things. But the country kind of developed as a result of this.
Yeah.
And of course, it was because of the low starting point. It had a very low initial starting point. We've had good leaders like this in Africa. You mentioned a few of them, Thomas Sankara, and a couple of them. They've never ended well. They've never ended well. Maybe they stayed longer than they were supposed to.
Yeah.
But the point was, if there is agree with the fact that countries might need some sort of benevolent dictator for a stage of their development, and then maybe eventually move from there.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Permit me to start from him, then somehow I merge it. So now, because somehow they're interconnected, because the reason why we have uneven development is because we have a widely contrasted pattern of leadership in Africa. That's the reason why. So if you have been to Egypt, you've been to Tunisia, even as at 15 years ago, 10 years ago, rather, or it was 10 to 12 years ago, before the Arab Spring, even before the Arab Spring, if you visit Tunis, the capital, you will think you're in a typical Western country. I've been to Cairo once, I'm like, wow, because I'm coming from the sub-Saharan Africa, and I visited Cairo, like, wow, because of the level of development. I get what I'm saying. Now you see the different pattern, and let me tell you, agree with me that most of those countries that you see the kind of cosmopolitan mien of how they look, they've had more dictatorial leaders. Because the truth is, our people sometimes they need a strong hand to get things done. So that's why I said we need to have a kind of autochthonous kind of democracy, a homegrown kind of democracy. We don't need to pattern our democracy in line with the Western criteria. That is the problem. I don't mind, see, when they say a leader is too old or too whatever, or doesn't speak good English or whatever, is he performing? And he perform leadership? I don't even mind how long he stays. Angela Merkel was there for 20 years, if I'm correct, about 17 years or thereabouts. And nobody said anything because his people keep voting. In fact, she had to step down. If not, our party would have won again. Why is it that the West always look at, okay, this person is a dictator. Now, when I say dictatorship, I want you to understand me. It's not by virtue of how long the person stayed. It's the process of the person staying there. If you are there and you have to influence the amendment of the Constitution because you want to run again and keep running again, and of course, the process of referendum will not be fair, will not be free and fair. You have to coerce people, you have to manipulate it. That's not democratic. So we should decide. Let us decide, should we have tenure elongation? Should we have a leader being there without any limits? In the UK, there is no limit. You can be there for life. I mean, I don't know if India, the prime minister can be there as long as the party is in power, right? And he remains leader of the party. Nobody talks about elongation. Most times we talk about this issue of how long an African is staying because they are practicing the presidential system of government. Have you noticed that? In the countries where it's a parliamentary system, nobody talks about how long the person has been there or the process, because they now look at the constitution, the person's party is in power. However, we will now look at the process that is keeping the person there. So the issue of uneven development is also tied to the contrasting pattern of leadership. You move down to some certain parts of Africa, you see the trajectory. If you go to Mauritius, you won't believe you're in Africa. I met a citizen of Mauritius in New Zealand, and she said she's African. I said, how can you be African? She's just like European. And Mauritius they have the most powerful passport in Africa. They are Indian descent. They are so organized, very beautiful, clean country. I don't even know the name of the president of Mauritius, for crying out loud. But what matters is that they are performing, they are functioning, they have good schools, they have good system. They are not, I have colleagues here that are professors, they don't envy the West, they don't think of relocating or anything, they don't see me as being special because I'm in Germany or anything, nothing, I have respect for them. That's Africa. Now, please go to Equatorial Guinea, small island country, very rich, small population. Why are they poor? Why are they poor? I have a brother that is a medical doctor that they want to be paying him 3,500 euros per month for him to come and serve there as a medical doctor, compared to less than $500 that is being paid in Nigeria per month. So you can imagine how rich that country is. But look at the people. Why are the people poor? Why are they underdeveloped? That is what they call, that's why I said development is tied to the pattern of leadership. Have I answered the question? Okay.
Thank you so much, Dennis.
Thank you.
It was really an insightful presentation, and thank you for your patience to take our questions. And you are always welcome, in my lectures and Jindal Center for Global South. You are a dear friend that I appreciate. And of course, also Dr. Shizam, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And my dear students. And before ending, I would like to present a small book for you as to appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sorry, it was not a good day.
Yes, no problem. I'll meet some. Okay. Here we go.
Yes, can we have it?
Oh, yes.
So, how many people have to group picture? So, when we send,
Sitting one side, yeah. No problem. Yeah.